but I'm pretty sure I was right.
A persuasive level, who are the celebrities? Because there were these very buttoned up celebrities where you get one post from Taylor Swift, or maybe Bad Bunny came in at the end. And I'm not
stealing. He's stealing my take. That's a DGG take. Ezra, I know you're watching. Motherfucker. Credit me.
In a background fashion, was testing this question of, well, actually, who are the celebrities today? Or at least in a persuasive level, who are the celebrities? Because there were these very buttoned up celebrities where you get one post from Taylor Swift, or maybe Bad Bunny came in at the end. And I'm not saying that stuff didn't help Democrats a bit. And again, you can overstate how much any of it mattered. But I do think there's a way of not seeing that in this world, like there are a bunch of people who are not named celebrities by the media, but they are influencers of massive power now.
In other words, a Joe Rogan of the left is Hassan by definition. Kind of. Hassan kind of fits the best descriptor for it, but he doesn't support the candidates. That's the issue. He's a Joe Rogan of the illiberal, of the commies or the socialists. So it doesn't help the Democrats at all.
Because they're just like, they're good at competing and getting attention and building direct relationships with their audience.
Steve Jobs had this saying that it's not the customer's job to know what they want. And I do think there's a little bit of like democratic like obsession with numbers and market research. That's like, well, what do the numbers say? And part of this is just innovation and improvisation and trying new stuff that hasn't been tried before, as opposed to backing out what you think the expectation is. And that's really true, I think, with attention entrepreneurship, which is not just to like look what does best in the algorithm and not just look at the data, but to try new things. Like, I don't love Joe Rogan's politics, but Rogan's a really good podcast. It's a really good show. I have listened intermittently for years, particularly I used to more than I do now. I've listened to a Rogan podcast where he does 2.5 hours with an astrophysicist. And they're totally fascinating. I mean, part of the problem too, as I sort of think this through, right, there is an asymmetry about risk. And I'm trying to figure out how, like, it just is the case that, like, a gaffe for a Democratic politician is going to
people say
Rogan's politics. But Rogan's a really good podcast. It's a really good show.
You just disagree there's a good podcast?
I've listened intermittently for years, particularly I used to more than I do now. I've listened to a Rogan podcast where he does 2.5 hours with an astrophysicist. And they're totally fascinating. I mean, part of the problem too, as I sort of think this through, right, there is an asymmetry about risk. And I'm trying to figure out how, like, it just is the case that, like, a gaffe for a Democratic politician is going to kind of stick out more. And
yes, thank you. True. Another stolen Destiny take. Wow, this is cute. So you guys you make these little shows, you watch a couple Destiny streams beforehand, and then you go and you rehash my takes, and then you take credit for them. Disgusting.
Stick more. Partly, I think, as a self-enforcing cycle, which is that if you do less media, then the gaffes stick more. And partly because, well, I'll do this take and then you can cut it out.
We're definitely not cutting it out now.
Well, this take has nothing to do with attention, but here's my take. Okay. You're at a restaurant with your kids, and the kid over there,
and the kid at the other table throws fucking food everywhere, and nobody gives a fuck. But if you're an adult and you throw one breadstick, everybody's looking at you like you're fucking crazy.
Their table is just same age, just acting like crazy, watching a screen, doesn't have their napkin, making a mess. And your kid says, "Well, they don't have to do it." And I'm like, I don't care about them. It's not my kid. I feel like that's how the mainstream media basically treats the Democratic Party.
True.
And I think it's partly the flip side of a correct conservative critique, which is that the vast majority of people who work in the mainstream media are products of a cultural milieu that is generally center-left in Democratic voting. But it means that they hold Democrats to higher standards.
Yeah, which is
and like,
so
Jamie
cringe.
Donald Trump or those other kids at the table. I don't care what they do. They're not my kids. And I truly believe this is true. That's going to get me in trouble. I don't care.
I do think there's something to it, but I think there's one more link in
okay, that was not that hot of a take, but okay.
the chain, which is that the issue is that the people who vote for Democrats are influenced, like, to them, the mainstream media is influences, right?
Exactly.
And I mean, it isn't the case, right? Or rather, it is the case that there are things Republicans can do in the media that are problems for them.
Is it? Like what? Give me an example. Like being mean to Trump? Oh, he's about to give an example, because this is a real show, not fucking Joe Rogan, but what's he going to say? What was a problem for them? Did Trump do anything bad? The H-1B stuff, kind of, but that was already after the election. What's he going to say?
Like, in certain ways, not be anti-immigrant enough.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know. I feel like Trump's messaging on immigration, like, has gone to different places a lot. I don't know if they ever got punished for that, did they?
You know, or say Donald Trump did not win the 2020 election.
That's true. They have their own gaps.
They have their own gaps.
I mean, it seems like all of them have no problems not saying that the election was fair. I don't know. Did they really get punished for that? I feel like Fauci has gotten more shit for engineering COVID and gain-of-function research as a bioweapon than Trump has had for denying the 2020 election.
Yeah, they're just different. Yes. And they're, because the mainstream media for them is in the role of enemy, for the mainstream media to be mad at them doesn't, like, that's already the storyline. Yes. So I was running these numbers because I was going to write a column about this, but I don't think I am now. So I'll say it to you instead, which is that by 2000, Fox News is it is a big enough force that one can take it seriously. Conservative talk radio is mature and is a big deal. So look at the 7 elections since 2000, presidential elections. Republicans win the popular vote in 2.
Yep.
In the 7 before, they win it in 4.
Yep.
Now, we know that Fox News persuades people to go right. And we know that Fox News is watched by people. And yet we also know that Republicans are performing worse as Fox News and right-wing media become more powerful. And I would think the reason for that is that Fox News has made Republicans weirder.
Oh, yes.
And like detached them from, the center. I don't think Donald Trump is electorally optimal himself. And so there's this weird way where you got to be very careful with this idea of like, I want this propaganda machine. Because the first person the propaganda machine is going to convince is you.
That's exactly right. And we see this in race after race after race. I mean, this has really been one of the stories of the MAGA era, is bad Republican candidates at all levels losing winnable races that they probably should have won because they were adhering to the exact same attentional incentives that produced Donald Trump up at the top. And this happens in all kinds of races. I mean, even races that they win that are way closer than they should be. So part of what's happening is this malformation of the public, right? This of different publics, of parties, of different audiences, is producing real pathologies that are, in many cases, again, among Republican candidates, rejected by the people who are outside of that particular audience sphere that is being formed by that kind of propaganda.
I mean, there's been all this post-2024 talk, some of it by me, about the problem of the groups on the Democratic side and the way they pull Democrats not just left, but into a distance from the median voter. They convince Democrats of things about the public that are not true. Right? The group that is saying, we represent black voters, we represent Hispanic voters, does not. I think conservative media is like that, but much more powerful for the right. It has given the right a very malformed view of the public.
Oh, I agree with that.
And it forces that view in a vicious way.
I think this is one place I think this is really true is on trans issues. I think people are conflicted on questions of policy around this. But I think one thing...
But Republicans have done a good job of making it seem like Democrats are in lockstep, that the average Democrat voter wants trans women beating up cis women in fucking boxing matches inside of bathrooms in grade schools. And it's like, that's like the average number is like, bro, what the fuck? Everybody, this is a weird issue for literally everybody.
That is pretty clear both from electoral results and from polling is that the public writ large is nowhere near as obsessed. I mean, obsessed with this issue and with the lives and bodies of these fellow Americans of ours as the propaganda machine and the attention merchants on the right are finding. And again, they're covering that because it rates. Like, to be clear, like there's a feedback loop here. They're not just like telling people to care about this. There's a small group of people that do really care about it, but I think it has been distorting for them. And I think there's all kinds of races where they have like closed with this message.
Well, I think that this issue is somewhere where, as you say, people are conflicted. So if you can split the electorate or make the electorate think about the part where they side with the right, sports teams, right?
I think that's probably their best
issue.
message.
But the issue, I think that, and I've said this a bunch, that one reason, I mean, just politically, I think Democrats should be thoughtful about not veering too far, is that what's about to come is cruelty. Yeah, and people don't like cruelty.
Yeah. Most people don't like cruelty.
Most people don't like cruelty.
Some people like cruelty.
When I think of the damage...
All of these takes need to just be fleshed out a little bit more, I think. Or maybe cruelty has the normativity baked into it. People don't like unjust cruelty. But when you can direct cruelty at people you feel deserve it, I think people love that kind of cruelty. I think people love that. So you have to be careful in the way that you understand this, I think.
Cruelty.
Yeah.
This is why I get this is the root of my ass-paintedness after the Corey firefighter thing, is because all the Republicans all of a sudden said, well, hold on, guys, cruelty's not okay. We can't do this. And it's like, wait a second. Cruelty is a very powerful motivator, dehumanizing the other side, getting all your base, riled up in laughter and making fun of people, because you guys do this to all of our people. Anytime somebody's violent on the side, the Paul Pelosi thing is the most obvious example. But like anytime something like this happens, you're rushing to find out who was the school shooter, which trans person had what thing happen or whatever. Like, So you can't just say that like people don't like cruelty. I think all of these things need an additional qualifier, because the Republicans are, your Democrats, even these guys a little bit are operating with these rules like, okay, we can't use this. And the Republicans are like, well, we're going to use this. We're just going to use it against the right people. They're removing, and I'm not trying to say, by the way, that like, well, we should be cruel, maybe. I'm just saying you have to understand that is a powerful weapon. There's a reason why people opt to use it.
I think Democrats should be thoughtful about not veering too far, is that what's about to come is cruelty. Yeah, right. And people don't like cruelty.
Yeah. And most people don't like cruelty.
Most people don't like cruelty.
Some people like cruelty.
When I think of the damage Twitter X did to Democrats, it came from 2020, not from 2024. It was this time when Democrats actually dominated Twitter and used it to do a lot of in-group policing and persuade themselves of a lot of electorally ruinous or unpopular ideas that then Republicans weaponized, in 2024. Like the fact that Republicans now have X and I guess True Social, and it's run by Musk and Trump, it's not obvious to me
that it's a net benefit. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that it's pretty clear to me that Musk's takeover has produced a kind of vibe shift and cultural influence for reactionary ideas.
I think there's a bit of fallacy going on with non-progressive Dems, where they think moderating on trans issues will solve anything. Dems could ban trans people from sports and bathrooms nationwide. It'll move zero voters. The answer isn't to move rightward. It's to find a way to change the conversation itself. Yeah, a little bit. I think the way that I would phrase this before is like when somebody's hiding their phone from you, like I think you wouldn't notice. If somebody had their phone next to you and they were like this, it would be whatever. But as soon as somebody like is doing like this, like even like 5 degrees, you're like, wait a second, what's going on over there? Like, I feel like it would have helped. Again, it's not like a huge issue. And most Dems don't care about this anywhere near as much as conservatives do. And maybe it wouldn't have made that big of a change. But when it feels like somebody's scared of an issue, you apply a lot of pressure to it. And for a Democrat to just come out and say, like, listen, yeah, trans shit is confusing. We're waiting for the science to figure it out. I don't know if trans women should be boxing cis women. Yeah, that's a rough one. Maybe not, probably not. Like, just own it and then move on rather than constantly dancing around it and then giving the other side that pain point to press on over and over and over and over and over again, I think.
That I think broadly benefits the right writ large, even if it sends a few Republican candidates over the cliff. You know what I mean? Like, and I think,
oh my fucking God, Copper 555 and Kick Chat. I should ban you for not bringing that up earlier. Did I remember that? I don't think I remembered that over the, did I remember that over the Piers Morgan arc? That's absolutely right. I think Tim Pool and other people were basically celebrating when that Ryan Carson guy got fucking stabbed in New York. And they're like, oh, look, he voted for this. Ah, look at that. Well, look what you got. You got what you fucking voted for. Ah, look. And they kind of do it with Californians a little bit. But yeah, that's absolutely true. That the response to that was unhinged. It was crazy. That was crazy. Tim Pool's fucking messages about that.
It's the right writ large, even if it sends a few Republican candidates over the cliff. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that, so I think there's trade-offs between that, honestly. And I think that's probably true. That's true for Democrats too. Like sometimes there are trade-offs between ideas moving public opinion in one direction or another, or normalizing things that seem ultra or radical that may cost a few candidates elections. And I think that those trade-offs go in both directions. The other thing is like, there's consequences here that are more than political. Like literally tens of thousands of people died that shouldn't have died during the pandemic because they didn't get vaccinated.
At least, yeah.
And so there's like real tangible results to all of this.
But nobody cares.
That transcend politics. And like,
well, to me, that's one of the ways, though, that this might not play out well for the right.
Yes.
That, for instance, a good possible example of this is that if the embrace of crypto culture leads to unwise levels of, I wouldn't call it deregulation, but because these things aren't regulated really now, but structures of regulation that are shadowy. So you have huge amounts of risk pooling in weird places. You might have contagion in the financial sector because Andy Lowry, my wife, wrote a great piece about this in The Atlantic.
He's about to say, well, then people are going to be punished for their bad decisions. The issue is that all of these things are so complicated now that people just aren't connecting the dots. They're not, it's like a dog pooping in your room and then, spanking him for it 2 months later. People aren't connecting it. Like, what reasonable person right now, not to be mean to any of you pro-crypto guys, I'm sorry, but like no reasonable human being is looking at any new coin or any new NFT as anything but a scam. Like that's just, if you've looked at any of these markets, especially, well, at the very least in like the influencer space or whatever, like this is all a scam. It's, if you're looking to invest, it's because you're trying to scam the other people who are coming in to get scammed before the main scammers do the big scam. Like you're sniping the coin, or like that's all it is. Like that's been demonstrated over and 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 over again, right? So I mean, like, yeah.
You might have contagion in the financial sector because financial firms begin reconstructing themselves as blockchain assets in order to go into later regulation. And then you have something that somebody doesn't understand or the regulators don't understand blow up. Yep. And now you're blamed for it in the way that, Bush and Republicans were in 2008. There's no guarantee that happens. It might not. But that's the kind of thing where...
That's the risk you're running. I'm biased here, and people listening to this who don't share my politics are free to, write this off or not.
Go on, talk to her. Wait, did she ever come back? Or did she piece completely out? Wait, no way, right? She must have come back, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, is that really her last episode? This was my nightmare moment. Rip. Good night were her last words.
Do you have like a certain type in men, like look wise?
If you looked at my track history, it would look like you literally just like walked into the DMV.
If only there was a way to make $100,000 so I can get every gift I could possibly want. And ideally making that 100K while having fun and watching sports. Oh great. Better Picks is the only pick 'em fantasy app where you can win $100,000 all NFL season long. You're one Better Picks lineup away from winning $100,000. Download Better, make an $100K lineup, and go have the best holiday season of your life.
Download Better, play Better Picks. She came on canceled. I had like a minute where I was like, I don't know if I'm on Team JoJo, but she really won me back lately.
No,
like,
yeah, that was me at first. It was like before I met her. Like I was like, I don't know, it kind of scares me. Then I met her and I was like, wait, I
don't have to be on the toilet. That's my
Hey y'all, I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you haven't gotten yourself any Talk To A merch,
be sure to click the link in the description below so we can match.
tag me and Talk To A while you're watching the episode.
And let us know what you think.
And before you go, don't forget, subscribe to that thing.
Oh, somebody said her last words were on the Twitter Spaces. Oh, rip. Have you ever seen the Young Turks videos of them sharing the leaked Vanessa Hudgens leaks in 2007, 2009? Nope. Bro, we were a different... Oh my god, the Reddit, the Creepshot subreddit. There was a literal subreddit called Jailbait. And then there was the whole Apple, the iCloud hack. Society's moved at a crazy rate.
But the center left, which still broadly consumes what we would call the mainstream media, legacy media, institutional media, that there's just more of this reality checking happening there. I mean, you know, there's a big fight about like, is inflation happening or is it not? And then it was clear that inflation was happening, it was very high. And you didn't get, you know, there were people who were talking about whether the inflation was the cause of the American Rescue Plan or whether it was really politically salient, but you didn't get a bunch of inflation truthers saying that the books were cooked or they were wrong or like inflation was high. And that was that core fact suffused the coverage of all the people in that media ecosystem and sphere. But I think if you saw 9% inflation under Donald Trump, I think you would have had a kind of similar, you know, reaction to the election, the election, which is like...
Basically, the entire squad except AOC consistently underperformed statewide candidates by meaningful margins, sometimes by as much as 15 plus points. Do people really think that letting progressives excess fester is the answer? I don't think anybody thinks that. It's just that's like the biggest left-leaning cultural popular media, basically, I think.
Coverage of all the people in that media ecosystem and sphere. But I think if you saw 9% inflation under Donald Trump, I think you would have had a kind of similar, you know, reaction to the election, the election, which is like, it's not happening. Like, I think there's just a mechanism of denial, a mechanism of like sheer sort of cleaving off from reality in that attentional ecosystem that is distinct.
So the political scientist Henry Farrell had this good piece on a Substack, an essay about, he was saying we misunderstand the problem of social media. And he had this analogy to porn. And he says that the way he's working off somebody else's argument about porn, but he says internet porn is tuned not towards people who watch it, but people who buy it. What internet porn is trying to do is not get you to like consume it for free, but to pay, you know, $9.95 a month or whatever. And the people who do that have more extreme tastes. And so you have this ecosystem of pornography that is tilted to be more extreme because it's trying to get this actual conversion. But it then creates this mass sense among the porn-watching public that tastes are more extreme, that everybody else is into things that are more extreme. It arguably changes people's tastes because you just get used to things. And in that way, pornography malforms the public. And his sort of argument is that social media is doing the same thing. It is making everybody think that everybody else's tastes politically are more extreme than they are. That, you know, everybody else is obsessed with a, you know, UK gang rape scandal from more than 10 years ago. The effect is not just what it does to the public, but the way it warps, you know, particularly the understanding of, you know, politicians and media figures who are looking at social media as if it is the public.
I think that's true. But I think there's a third dimension here that, I feel like all of their takes just need like one more level of analysis, and they would be so accurate. This is what they're saying. Okay, imagine this is like the extreme bar for how extreme you could be in a particular take. All right, what they're saying is the American public is here. Okay, but social media is trying to convince you that they're here. Okay. So this is where Democrats really are, but social media is making it seem like they're actually here, okay? But what's happening, I think, is if we look at the other side, maybe social media might be saying that, oh, well, you know, even though it looks like Republicans are here, they're actually here, right? But there's a third thing that's happening here where on the Republican end, you think that Democrats believe all this, when in reality they only believe this, which means that you now move a little bit further this way. And I think this is the thing that's happening. Like, I think that this space is moving because the perception of the other side as being more radical gives you more space to be radical. And I think the perfect expression of that is now that every single time Donald Trump does something, the response, it used to be, well, he's not actually doing that, or it's not actually what you're accusing him of doing. It's not actually that. The response is, well, you guys did it first, right? And I think that that's super, super, super relevant to what's going on right now in the political sphere. That as people perceive, when you perceive the enemy as being this, it means that you have more flexibility to move in this direction, right? But that's what not to sound pretentious, but isn't this just the Overton window shifting drastically to the right, where normal Democrats are seen as leftists, right-wingers are seen as centrists, and far-righters are seen as... No, because it's not just a shifting the Overton window around, it's the expansion of it to further left and further right spaces, I think, that's my feeling. But...
And his key point here, which I think is just the bedrock for this analysis, and so often left behind and so important, is that we're talking about collective understanding and collective publics as complicated organisms that are greater than the sum of their parts. Because, as he writes in the piece, like, a lot of this discourse is about individuals. Like, a bunch of individuals hold these wrong beliefs. But democracy is something we do together. It's not a bunch of aggregated individual choices. And I think this argument is completely correct. And partly it's because we're also being constantly pulled towards things that are the most attentionally salient, which is just a distinct category from, like, at a bedrock from what we think is important. I cannot stress this enough. Attention is not a moral faculty.
Yeah.
There's a Lippmann writing in 19-teens that I quote in the book. It's during Versailles. And he says,
because we have this, we might think automatically the things that draw our attention the most are the things that are the most important, but that's not necessarily true at all, right? Something like balancing your checkbook, I don't know if that makes sense anymore. Being financially responsible, whatever, that's a really boring topic. And what the Kardashians or Kanye West are doing is way more attention getting. Just because it gets more attention, that doesn't mean it's actually more important. But we're not giving attention to things that are important, right?
There's a Lippmann writing in 19-teens that I quote in the book. It's during Versailles. And he says, the American people have a great deal of interests in what happens at Versailles, but they're not interested in it. He's like, in the same way that, like, a child has a real interest in his father's business, he's going to inherit, but he's not interested in it. He's like, what we're interested in is, like, the gowns of the queen, basically.
What you're saying is what Kierkegaard said about the news. What? What is this?
Possibly be God.
What Kierkegaard talked about was the newspaper. Everybody wakes up in the morning and reads the newspaper. This was, to his mind, terribly superficial. Think of what he would have said about commercial television and the internet. I mean, we're constantly surfing and flipping through and taking a quick look and dropping things and never having a kind of center of gravity about what's most...
Bro, this guy looks like his ear got shot more than fucking Trump's did. What the fuck? Sorry.
Surfing and flipping through and taking a quick look and dropping things and never having a kind of center of gravity about what's most deeply important to us. So Kierkegaard thought that Christianity was giving you this model of absolute focused, caring commitment, and that modern society was deeply hostile to these kinds of commitments. And that's, I think, a shrewd insight. And one can accept a lot of it without necessarily accepting that Christianity is the kind of caring commitment that you ought to have. It's not hard to take Kierkegaard's story and, in a way, secularize it to any number of different kinds of strong, caring commitments as a way of focusing life and resisting this sort of banalizing leveling. What Kierkegaard called a leveling process was assimilating everything, digesting it, throwing it away, and never finding one's center of gravity in something most worth living and even dying for.
But isn't that
Okay. Somebody said, these two guys have almost the exact same face. These are the chatters that call me face blind, by the way. Calcifer thinks these guys have the same face. Fuck you guys.
Yeah. And it's pretty funny because it's bang on. And the point is that we all understand, we have a category of words, going back to porn, like titillating, prurient, lurid, that obscene, that describe the category of things that we think that we both know draw our attention but are morally dubious.
Isn't this similar to what P.F. Young meant by heuristics are the most important factor in the political world? No. I would agree that heuristics are the most important factor when measuring a vibe, but I think he was arguing that heuristics were the most important factor when measuring what was true. And I think those are two very different things. Like, I'm never going to disagree that people use heuristics or vibe checks to feel how they want to vote for people. But people are incorrect in assuming that those vibes are getting them closer to something that is true or important, rather than something that's just attention getting.
And what happens in the sort of collective malformation around attention as the most signature value, the only thing that matters in this competitive landscape, is a kind of moral degradation. Because it's...
Destiny, looking at the actual approval, do you think if someone argued Trump's mental faculties, as happened against Biden, this would go down? Or reps are actually that blind? They would have to do it in an epic way. They would have to destiny that conversation. If you go in and you're like, I think that Trump is mentally not well, and then Trump is like, well, and then he does his whole ramble answer, then you're going to look like a fucking retard because nobody gives a fuck. You should just quiz him. I think you should just quiz him. I think Trump is a fucking retard. What do you mean by that? What's the difference between the trade deficit and the debt? How to relate these numbers? Like, explain what the fucking tariff is. Like, what happened to the war in Ukraine and Russia? Like, why is that still going on? Like, you have to be able to press him and hold him accountable. But I don't think Trump will ever go on a platform that does this. Like how conservatives won't go on platforms to do this. And he doesn't need to, because he's got a whole circuit that he can run that will never hold him to account like that. So you never even have the opportunity to press like that, which is why all the media is nice to him, because they wanted to appear on their shows and get the ratings on that shit anyway. And somebody linked me and said there was a different mic they were using instead of my Re 20. So fuck you guys. Okay, sorry.
Pulling us towards things that we know at some level aren't that important or morally defensible, but do get our attention.
Okay, so I think this actually brings up a good, like very counter to this conversation question, which is maybe the optimal strategy if your vision, your sense of the public, your politics, maybe your moral faculties are so warped by competing for this volume of attention, is to not play. So in 2020, Joe Biden is the least online and the least attentionally sophisticated or even interested of any of the Democrats running for president. And I don't think that is unrelated
to him winning,
to why he won in 2020. He certainly won in the primary and possibly even won in the general, because he had lots of problems as a candidate. He was, I think, too old to be running, effectively even then, or at least very much on the edge. And he was diminished from what he once was. But his sense of the electorate had not been driven
malformed.
Malformed.
Yes, that's a great point.
And so he didn't get on board with a bunch of dumb things other people are getting on board with.
That's a great point.
We're kind of implying that the right strategy here is an embrace in the way, some kind of alternative, but still embrace what we're seeing from Trump and Musk. Maybe it's the opposite.
And think about this for candidates. I mean,
because if Biden would have been more socially engaged, maybe he would have been more on the Black Lives Matter and trans activism and all that, and maybe that would have hurt him more. I think is kind of what they're saying there, which maybe could be true. Who knows?
After Bush won in 2004, when there was a version of the discourse we're going through now, the idea is what we need? A black guy with a foreign-sounding name who is a former professor and community organizer.
Constitutional law professor, yes.
That was ludicrous. What we need...
That was ludicrous, right? That after 9/11, we're going to Barack Hussein Obama. That was a crazy name. And there's a reason why Trump makes fun of it so much now. But
is a guy you can have a beer with who also has a ranch. And that's what we need. And it was no, we needed something totally different. Two things. One, I think it is important, again, to distinguish between what is this doing to people more broadly and what is it doing to political professionals?
Yes.
And I think it's extremely dangerous for political professionals to read social media as representative of the public. I also think you shouldn't just ignore it as online or Twitter is not real life, because increasingly there is no distinction between the two. But
look, these guys are just copying. This is shamelessness. This is shamelessness right here, okay? They better be subbed at least.
And I think it's extremely dangerous for political professionals to read social media as representative of the public. I also think you shouldn't just ignore it as online or Twitter is not real life, because increasingly there is no distinction between the two. But there are different selves that we have. There's a self that wants to read a novel and the self that scrolls Instagram. There's, the self that doesn't want to eat that third cookie and the self that does eat the third cookie. There are different publics too.
I think that, I don't know if they'll get into this at all, but there's the added dimension as well of all the foreign actors are also participating here in ways that are moving our conversations too, which we're not even accounting for here at all, right? Not that that's incorrect. I mean, you don't have to talk about every single thing at every single conversation, but I think it's an important factor as well.
In that same way, within the public, there's a public that feels very compassionate towards immigrants, feels proud of America being a nation of immigrants, and there's a public that feels like they're being ripped off and invaded. And sometimes they're the same people, often they're the same people. But Farrell's whole point is that these publics are formed collectively. So I think it's important, that political professionals don't make this simple representational mistake, which I agree.
Can you explain what a trade deficit is in layman's terms? It just means I buy more stuff from you than you buy from me. That's it.
With you. The point is that these publics are formed collectively. So I think it's important, that political professionals don't make this simple representational mistake, which I agree with you, has led to a lot of poor choices. People on this social media platform are screaming to me about this means there's some constituency behind them. And yet, as the line between reality and online breaks down, the vanguard of people screaming really do have cultural significance.
That's true. But here's one of my big theories, and we'll know in 4 or 8 years if I'm right. I think we are ready, or very near ready. And I see it in the states and counties banning phones in schools, and just the discourse for true backlash. And
yes,
I think that the next really successful Democrat, although it could be a Republican, is going to be oppositional to it. In the way that when Barack Obama ran in 2008, and I really think people forget this part of his appeal, he ran against cable news, against 24-hour news cycles, against political consultants. Right? People didn't like the structure and feeling of political attention then. And I don't think there was anywhere near the level of disgust and concern and feeling that we were being corroded in our souls.
This dude has just been tweeting about dismantling the government every hour. What the fuck? Yeah, Elon Musk is like an enemy of the state. Elon Musk is like a foreign invader who has just invaded our government, and he is a virus that is slowly trying to destroy from the inside out every part of our government. I don't even know if he got a security clearance. I thought that he failed his standard Form 86, right? And he's just like him and his disgusting goons are crawling through whatever federal offices they can to steal our data, to post false information online. He's just an enemy of the country. That's all he is. That's what he's doing. It's disgusting. There's no space to even talk about it or do anything about it. There's nothing you can do.
It's political consultants, right? People didn't like the structure and feeling of political attention then. And I don't think there was anywhere near the level of disgust and concern and feeling that we were being corroded in our souls that there is now. And I think that at some point you are going to see a candidate come up who is going to weaponize this feeling, right? That they're going to run not against Facebook or Meta as a big company that needs to be broken up.
But all of it.
They're going to run against all of it. That like society and modernity and politics shouldn't feel like this. And some of that will be banning phones in schools, right? It'll have a dimension that
Isn't it illegal? Like, what the fuck? Illegal where? In the federally illegal? Why the fuck would that even matter? Don't ask me that question. I tell people in real life this. Don't ask that question. Stop doing that. Don't ask that question. It doesn't matter if it's illegal. Trump will pardon you. He's already signaled that. I don't even know if Trump would enforce the laws. Who the fuck cares? It doesn't matter if it's illegal. That should never, ever, ever be a question that you think about anymore for the next 4 years. Isn't this illegal? Doesn't matter. Who cares? The law is to be enforced by the executive, which is Donald Trump. He's not going to force the law against people that are loyal to him. He's already made that clear. He's already demonstrated that. He's already done exactly that in the past with people. So
it is policy, but some of it is going to be just absolutely like radiating a disgust for what it is doing to us and to ourselves. I mean, your book has a lot of this in it. I think that political space is weirdly open, but it seems very clear to me somebody's going to grab it.
I could not agree more. Even before we get to politics, Thoreau for president.
But not Thoreau. I really think this is important, right? It's not somebody.
Well, you can't drop out and run for president.
It's not somebody who is withdrawing and wants to live on a lake. There are people like that, right? It's more like John Haidt. Right. It's more like what he is channeling. I mean, but channeled into politics, which is an actual anger at it. It is not supposed to feel this way, right? And I don't think it's just gonna be like
if this was happening in a third world country, we'd be intervening by this point. Why are those lazy fucking bums at Langley not doing anything? I don't know. I also don't know how much this factors into it. Maybe it doesn't factor in at all, but I feel like it probably feels a lot different when half the US population legitimately likes this stuff. Like they supported, like Donald Trump got voted in after attempting an insurrection. Like, so the American public obviously has a massive appetite for it. And now, like, imagine again, bro, it is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Imagine if you're like a federal officer, or a federal agent. Why the fuck is it so hard to find any fucking video? I don't understand how this shit is so fucked.
But we begin tonight with Donald Trump. Hundreds of ag polls. To perhaps no one's surprise, the decision by Trump is wildly unpopular.
How we feel in our recent times. Donald Trump should pardon all protesters. Wouldn't that be crazy? 58% disagree, 17% unsure, only 24% agree. Huh. Crazy how Republicans change their minds. Yeah, but like, why would you even stand up to Trump, or why would you even try to resist any of this? Like, like, imagine the cost you're paying. Are you going to die against some lunatic fucking insurrectionist who is going to get pardoned by your boss or your boss's 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 boss anyway? Like, why? If you were a federal agent, I don't know why the fuck you would do anything for this country right now. You just have to take orders from Trump because he's just going to forgive everybody else that's doing horrible shit to you anyway, right?
Anger at it. It is not supposed to feel this way, right? And I don't think it's just gonna be like we're gonna get rid of TikTok, but it is gonna be something about this culture and society has fallen.
I think it's a keen insight. I agree. And what I thought about is like sometimes you'll read historical dispatches from like peak industrial London, and people are just being like, this is the most disgusting place that has ever been put on God's earth. Like, it's
if the Nixon scandal happened today to Trump, do you think he would get impeached? Bro, Nixon, like Trump has done a billion times worse than the Watergate shit. Watergate is like fucking child's play. Nobody would even give a fuck if Watergate happened. They're like, yeah, obviously. Watergate has happened in almost worse ways. The whole Kremlin invasion of DNC servers that Trump's election, like his campaign was literally like coordinating with these people. They're like, no one cares. No one gives a fuck about any of this.
It's just sewage and coal ash in the sky.
Satanic mills.
Just satanic mills. Just the sheer stench. And just like, what have we done? How far from God we have fallen in this shit. And they were right. Like, it was genuinely disgusting. And, it did reach a point with all of these things, particularly the worst depredations of the Industrial Revolution, where people had enough. And they're having enough was represented in a million different political tendencies, cultural movements, manifestations. And we are at that. I mean, it is in the course of writing this book. I mean, literally from the conceptualization of this book for an essay that I wrote in, 2022 to this book coming out now, we've already moved a tremendous amount. I mean, when I first started telling people about this book, I'm like, attention. And now it's like, right.
And I've been obsessed with this for years.
Well, you have for sure, yes. Yes. And I think you and I are predisposed to be obsessed with it because the universe in which we operate is like, we're constantly trying to sort of screen information, get the good information, protect our attention, try to think in a way that's productive. But I just think the ubiquity of this, I mean, yes, I think there is there's an wellspring, an untapped wellspring for a total rebellion against the way it feels to be inside your mind at this particular moment with this particular form of attention capitalism.
And the way it feels to be inside, like, the collective's mind.
Yes.
Even, I know a good number of Trump supporters. And they may like him, but they don't like not how he feels, but how all this feels.
No one likes it.
Right? Nobody likes it.
No one
and
likes
that.
Is that true? Or is that just what they say? I don't know if I believe that. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
That is there, right? It's a thing that Obama was very good at working with, right? That is there in its modern version, I think, to derive energy from. Before any of that happens, though, he's going to be president again. You've probably heard. And
I'm just hearing this now.
Is there any actual evidence of Russian interference in American politics? Bots, for example, other than paying money to American influencers? Yeah, of course. You have, the tenant media thing. That was a huge thing. There's no way that's the only one. The FBI said that there were, 260 other influencers taking money or something like that. Tenant media, that was a huge thing. It was like $10 million between 3 people in a year. The Mueller indictments and the domestically ran Russian interference social media accounts and everything that were running through all of our election cycles, that was insane. Those were popular Twitter accounts that I had engaged with. That 10_GOP account, I thought that was the official Tennessee GOP party account. It had over 200,000 followers on Twitter. That was a Russian ran account. There were so many of these things. There were so many. There were so many social media accounts and everything. And that was in 2016. Who the fuck knows what it looks like now? Jesus.
Before any of that happens, though, he's going to be president again. You've probably heard. And
I'm just hearing this now.
How do you think, I'm sure you're thinking about this, how's your coverage of Trump in 2025 and his White House, knowing everything we know about the way attention works under his presidency, going to be different than it was in 2017?
The one thing that I tried really hard in the first term, which I thought was important, and I think I mostly succeeded at, but certainly not always, was modulation. That to me is a central question of modulation. If you turn the dial on the stereo to 10 and leave it there, it will sound like 5 eventually. And then you can't turn it up past 10.
Yeah.
And this was something I was...
Oh, this is my complaint on the fascist shit. Like, there's no words to call Trump now because people have been ringing this fascism bell for like a decade. And it's like, I don't think we were there for the first term, but like now we are. And
intentional about the first time, but I think even more intentional now. And I think you see some of this, like literally no one's saying anything about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. It's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, wouldn't be my choice, but I don't need to choose, and wouldn't be a Democratic president's choice. But that's not to say that like no one should raise any concerns.
Let me ask you something about the negativity bias and the incentives it sets up, right? Obviously, the future of the Republican Party is not highly determined by what MSNBC hosts say about different Trump appointees, but there is something about a world where Marco Rubio gets no coverage for being who knows what kind of Secretary of State he'll be, but plausibly a more normal, thoughtful, Marco Rubio is a politician, works hard and like tries to think about ideas.
He's also genuinely qualified for it.
Yes. Compared to a Pete Hegseth or a RFK Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard, right? In this world where we say that there's value to attention and we give all this attentional resource to the worst people, making them more valuable to Trump and squeezing out. Like, is there actually like a bad incentive system being set up by that? Like, I never know what to do with this thought, which I've had for a long time, because on the one hand, you can't just ignore the terrible things happening in government. That's a dereliction of what we're here to do.
Right.
And on the other hand, if you believe that just giving things attention is to give them energy, to only cover the terrible things happening in government is to, not empower like the Doug Burgums and Marco Rubios in the future. Like there feels like some tension here that the media's never known what to do with.
I think that's interesting. I mean, I think that I don't have a worked out theory for how to deal with that, but I think it's a good point. I have a broader thing I've been thinking.
This is like the hopelessness of the media environment that they're honing in on. And it's like, well, how the fuck do you cover this? Because if you cover it all the time, you're just like Trump deranged. And it does feel bad. This feels shitty. Like the past couple of months have felt shitty. It just feels hopeless and horrible. But then do you just stop covering it and allow it to normalize? Like,
thinking about a lot. This phrase that is like on a brainstorming notepad of mine, and I've thought about a million versions of it. The phrase is the opposite of doom. And I think about this a lot because I think that we live in a doom-obsessed time, doom scrolling. We do not live in an age in which we have a conception of the opposite of doom. We do not live in an age where we have a lot of conceptualizations of utopias. There's different ages where all sorts of different people are planning their utopias. Spiritual leaders, architects, political leaders, this is it. This is what it's going to look like when we figure it all out. No one does that anymore. I mean, literally no one does that. Like, I can't think of a modern contemporary version of utopia. Maybe in some version, the sort of Trump, I'll fix everything personalist is the closest we get. Personalist vision of fixing everything. And the reason I think about this is I think it's probably really important to us in our collective public and individually to put our attention towards a vision of what we think something great would be. And
can't you just describe what they're doing now? You don't need to call it fascist anymore. Just describe it and why it's never wrong. Just describe why it's wrong. Never say the words anymore. Yeah, but the problem is, I said this like 4 years ago, is if you described fascism now to conservatives after 4 years of Trump, but you don't use the word fascism, they'll be for it. They'll be totally for it. And they'll like clap and applaud. So you can't talk about like, well, let's talk about like totalitarianism. Even in that word, they're like, oh, fuck you. But if you're like, do you think that the president of the United States, like, what did Tim Pool say when Beasley brought up, how do you feel about the president of the United States suing a pollster? His response was, well, that's his right to. Like, nobody seems to care, like, if you point it out. So who are you pointing it out for, I guess? Like, I'm pointing it out now for my audience, but you guys all generally agree with this already. Am I capturing people from the other side with this? Probably not. And now they've totally insulated themselves from all, like, political critique, except in the most sterilized form possible. So bringing on people that will be guaranteed to, like, play ball and be friendly and everything. So it's, yeah, I don't know.
It relates to this question about the individual coverage decisions, which are absolutely affected by negativity bias, like 100%. And conflict, too. Like, there's a fight over Egseth, as there should be, and there's not a fight over Rubio, and the conflict drives the news. I mean, that's as old as news. But the reason I bring all this up is because I sometimes think about it just in terms of, like, putting attention on things that have worked, as opposed to things that haven't worked. So not so much about individuals or members of the cabinet, but, like, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, 30 years ago, it just was inconceivable we would cure HIV/AIDS. And it's amazing that we essentially have, and we've done it through the labor and work of people across all sectors of society.
This is so true. Like, that leukemia thing was crazy. The Alzheimer's drugs breakthrough, I think, has been crazy. The Ozempic stuff has been crazy, but, like, it doesn't feel that way. Our phones are getting faster. Our computers are fucking insanely crazy. Like, it used to be that we hungered for a new graphics card every year, and now, like, there are still people who are running on 1080 Ti's. We used to, like, so much technologically, health-wise, medically, like, so many things have improved in so many ways, but for some reason it feels like more doomer than ever before, you know? Like, again, there's, like, that positivity and negativity. Millennials will say, like, I've lived through so many once-in-a-lifetime events, this is a horrible thing, I don't want to do this anymore. But then, on the other hand, we endured, like, once-in-a-lifetime events, like, 3 times, and we're, like, still doing fine. It's like a perspective thing, but yeah, it just doesn't feel that way. It always feels horrible.
Over the course of decades, they took a thing that just felt horrible and intractable and made it so much better. And there's just so much less attention on those stories. And I think it is making it harder and harder for us to conceptualize that it is possible even to do good things and to solve problems.
All right, I have a lot of thoughts on this. One is that, I mean, you and I both know, there have been a million efforts in journalism to do solutions-based journalism.
Yes.
Right?
Good news,
solutions-based journalism. And they don't work in part, not that they don't work at all.
No, but it's
and this is as you make the point of, at the beginning of this conversation and often in your book, attention is a business. So when they don't work, your cable news show gets replaced, right? With somebody who will do doom.
Yeah.
On the other hand, one of the things I really believe about the podcasting world, one thing that makes me very hopeful about it, is these podcasts have built, huge, unbelievably huge audiences, not being primarily about doom.
Agreed.
Right? They don't actually have a big negativity bias. They're very hopeful. They're futuristic, right? The obvious thing to say is the opposite of doom is hope. But I think the opposite of doom is curiosity, at least in this respect. I don't think it's utopia. I think it's something about curiosity, interest, beauty. There's this way that doom is a belief that we know how things are going to go.
Comforting in its own way because of that.
Comforting in its own way because of that. And mystery feels to me like an opposite of doom.
Yeah,
and that there's a dimension here where I think what has gone wrong in a lot of this journalism is it feels hokey and cliche, and it has, it is actually too much the opposite of doom. When the problem is, like, you want to be on another dimension entirely. That, like, if the only question is things go good, things go bad is more attention grabbing. If the question is things go bad or are there UFOs?
Right.
Things go bad or, like, this novelist speaks unbelievably beautiful. Because I see it in the ratings of this show, right? I can get very high downloads for Trump episodes and very high, particularly over time, downloads for a novelist who describes the world in a really beautiful way. I don't think the opposite of doom is hope or good things or utopia. I think for attention.
It's curiosity.
It's curiosity. It's interesting. It's like, oh, have you ever thought about it this way? Or isn't that weird?
I want to make a point that I'm afraid is, like, boringly technical after what you just said, which I am chewing on. I also think the technological infrastructure of podcasts matters tremendously. You've talked about that line from, I forget who wrote, "Wherever you get your podcast is a radical statement." That the fact that
Would you consider yourself a journalist in this media era? There are a few things I've done, like my Israel trip, which we'll go over the videos of, that maybe you could consider like journalism, but for the most part, no, I would consider myself a political pundit. I think generally you would say a journalist is somebody who does original reporting. So you're going out, you're talking firsthand to primary sources. This is like what a journalist does, or you become a primary source. You do your own research. I feel like I occupy more. I would call it a political pundit position, basically.
Podcasts have built audiences largely outside of algorithmic feeds. Have built them through an open protocol called RSS. That technical backbone actually matters for precisely what you're talking about. Part of the reason podcasts have flourished, 2-3 hour podcasts with novelists about obscure topics, long solo monologues about history. I mean, all sorts of stuff, is because they're not embedded in the same technical attentional marketplace. And I think that really matters a lot.
So
and
I think you should do that poll you were discussing about where communities came from and how their ideology. Yeah, well, okay. There's just been a lot of turbulence lately, but yeah.
Technical attentional marketplace. And I think that really matters a lot. And I think it's actually really hopeful because I think one of the things to remember here, and this is really an important point, everyone has wiped this from their memory, but the first version of the mass internet was an entirely commercially engineered mass internet with Prodigy, CompuServe, and AOL. AOL emerged as the winner. AOL acquired Time Warner. AOL was the bell of the ball in this huge company, and it was a walled garden, and you dialed up, and you were in this little world that was curated by these large commercial entities. And that was destroyed, partly, ironically, because of Mark Andreessen's development of a graphical user interface to a non-commercial open internet that rewarded curiosity, that rewarded people connecting about obscure topics. It rewarded hobbyism. It rewarded obsessive small little corners of knowledge. It's already been the case once that an open internet animated by curiosity defeated a closed commercial internet.
Are you going to do more debating in the near future? Maybe, but there's two huge problems. One is I don't think people want to debate. If you're in the superior cultural position, then you become anti-debate because why would you debate? All you can do is lose. But two, another thing that's difficult is after Trump won, the mask came off and now they're no longer debating, right? So like a debate before Trump won would have been something along the lines of like, Trump is going to do tariffs that are going to destroy the U.S. economy. Like, let's debate this. And it's like, well, it's negotiations. He's not really going to do this. It's not really going to hurt the blah, blah, blah. But now nobody wants to have that debate now because now they'll just like, okay, yeah, he is doing tariffs and yeah, they might hurt the economy. So like, that's worth it. Like we need to punish. So now like the conversation has moved so much that there's not even anything to argue anymore. I'd be like, Trump is going to do tariffs that are going to do significant damage to the U.S. economy. They're going to hurt our ability to maintain relationships with other countries in the future. And it's going to permanently damage U.S. trade. And they're going to go, okay, are you making my argument for me? Or yeah, that's awesome. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know what the fuck I don't know what I'm here for.
It doesn't have to be the case that the version of the commercial internet we have now is still the same one. So that to me is really hopeful though, because it's like, we have divided selves. We have divided desires. There's different parts of us that want different things, and different market setups, technical setups, institutional setups can cultivate different parts of those selves. It's not like we lose one part or another. The other part is still there. It's a question about the systems around us drawing forth those different parts of us or not.
I think that is a good place to end. Always our final question. What are 3 books you would recommend to the audience?
So first I'll start with a classic, which is Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Oh.
The GOAT.
The GOAT in this discourse, I think it still totally holds up. The first chapter, which is
somewhat predicts Donald Trump.
Yes, totally.
In an explicit way.
Yes. Totally, yes. In an explicit way. Also, the first essay, which is just about the sort of different versions of a dystopian future between 1984, which is information constraint, and Brave New World, which is overflow of entertainment information about how we ended up with a Brave New World. Great. Another book that has been mentioned on your podcast a lot and relevant, which is, again, I feel like I'm sort of citing canonical texts here. And it's important for me to do because I want to be clear, as we all are as authors, lots of people have been thinking about this very well and very hard. But Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing is a fantastic book. It's strange and distinct and is much more, I would say, like spiritually omnivorous than the book that I've written. More sort of interior in its focus too, about how you kind of do this work with yourself and with other people as a kind of like collective radical undertaking.
Yeah, the form of that book is also the function, because I feel like so much of what books about attention are about is how it homogenizes all of us. And that book, I love that book so much. It is a completely distinct product, a completely distinct mind. Like no other human being would write that book.
No other human being would write that book. There's no comp for that book. It is its own thing.
Yeah.
And it's also a book
I love books like that.
I love books like that too. And I also think it's a rare thing to write a nonfiction book where you can't get 85% of the way there by just like hearing the author on a podcast or reading a review. Like you got to actually read the book. And then my final is a work of fiction of short stories by an author named Tony Tulatamudi called Rejection. And it is the bleakest.
Not safe for work, friends.
Not safe for work. It is the bleakest and one of the most unremittingly punishing pictures of the hell that we've built for ourselves. And yet, I say this, that doesn't sound like a book you want to read. I absolutely tore through it. I read the whole thing in basically a day, and it just stuck with me, and I really recommend it highly.
One of the most intense reading experiences.
There is a 10 to 12 page granular description of a sexual fantasy in this book that your full body will basically, you will like hit a point of physical paralysis as you read this, but also can't stop reading and also are so amused. It's so funny and it's so dark. And I've never read anything like it.
Chris says, your book is great. I recommend it to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Okay, fuck. We'll watch this one tomorrow. I need to just unplug from the news. I wanted to do, I could do all of the Israeli interviews this month. I just need to do them. But there's just like so much stuff going on every day. I don't know what to. 12.34 on the volatile. Oh, God. Oh, man, tomorrow. Kenshi 2. Wait, what? Looks like Kenshi 2 is closer than we thought 10 months ago. Fuck you.
Hoo-hoo! I might be a little late to this one, but hey.
Fortune is reporting that Doge is halting payments to contractors. What does that mean? Like to all contractors? Like including like military contractors? Or what does that mean? Shutting down payments to federal contractors so the world's richest man may have access to sensitive systems used at the U.S. Treasury Department. The corruption and waste is being rooted out in real time. They're rapidly shutting down payments to a Lutheran charity. Okay, that's great. Yeah, they definitely don't have the authority to do that. I don't even know if the department itself has the authority to do that. If the funding has already been allocated by Congress, definitely a fake department like Doge doesn't have the authority to do it, but okay. Musk said Doge was shutting down payments by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to Lutheran Family Services, a faith-based charity that has been providing social services to refugees. Okay. Do we know? So is USAID just dead? Is that just debunked, or like is this gone? Senior USAID security officials put on leave after attempting to refuse Musk's Doge access to agency systems. Can we get like, hello? Are any of you like security guards here that can defend this shit? Is this literally all U.S. foreign aid? I believe so. USAID was all of our foreign. The United States Agency for International Development is an independent agency of the U.S. government that is primarily responsible for administering civilian foreign aid and development assistance, and it had a budget of $50 billion. It's one of the largest official aid agencies in the world, and accounts for more than half of all U.S. foreign assistance, the highest in the world in absolute dollar terms. I don't know if this whole agency is like on pause or dead or what. I don't know what's. Doge personnel wanted to gain access to USAID security systems and personnel files. 3 sources said. 2 of those sources also said that Doge personnel wanted access to classified information, which only those with security clearances and a specific need to know are able to access. 3 sources told CNN that the Doge personnel were eventually able to access the headquarters. On Sunday, in response to CNN's report about the incident, Musk said that USAID is a criminal organization. Yeah, and we're waiting with bated breath now to see if there's going to be some crazy executive order that's pulling the plug of the Department of Education. I saw tweets about that. I don't know how likely that is, if that's actually a thing that... So no, I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows. They don't know how any of this works, so we don't know what'll happen when they start breaking it. Fuck, I need to go. I don't have time.